When Sergeant David Cole bought a collapsing farm for $1, the whole town laughed. Worthless, they said. Cursed. But on his first morning there, his battle-scarred K9 froze, then started digging like his life depended on it. What he unearthed would rewrite their pity into awe and reveal a secret buried for 70 years. 2 combat deployments had stripped David of nearly everything. His savings drained by medical bills and therapy copays, his marriage dissolved under the weight of silence and distance, and his sense of purpose lost somewhere between foreign deserts and stateside VA waiting rooms. The only constant through it all was Ranger, his military working dog, who'd stood guard during nightmares and walked beside him through every hollow day with the same disciplined stride he'd kept under gunfire. When the county offered him a derelict plot of land for a single dollar, too broken for taxes, too far gone for resale, he signed the papers without hesitation. He didn't need luxury. He just needed quiet. The farmhouse leaned dangerously to one side, its roof sagging under decades of rain and neglect. Windows were shattered, porches rotted through, and the barn looked like a strong breeze might reduce it to kindling. As he stepped past the rusted gate with nothing but a worn duffel bag and Ranger at his heel, neighbors watched from shaded porches, shaking their heads. Poor guy, one muttered. That place should have been bulldozed years ago. But David wasn't looking for approval. He was looking for peace. And with Ranger walking beside him, the only thing that had made a home with him, he finally felt like he'd found the edge of something that might resemble home. That very first night, however, something shifted. As dusk settled over the overgrown fields and crickets began their evening song, Ranger, who'd charged through live fire zones without flinching, refused to go near the barn. He stood rigid at the edge of the yard, ears pricked forward, eyes locked on a specific spot near the crumbling foundation. David tried coaxing him closer, voice low and calm, hand resting gently on the dog's neck. But Ranger backed away, tail stiff, muscles coiled tight, not in fear but in intense focus. It was the same posture he'd taken overseas when tracking hidden threats. By morning, the behavior escalated. While David shoveled debris near the house, Ranger scratched furiously at the same patch of earth outside the barn, claws tearing into the soil with urgent precision. Even stranger, he refused food or water unless David moved the bowls away from that side of the property. Curious, David knelt where Ranger had been digging and brushed aside layers of dirt until metal clanged beneath his fingers. Buried just below the surface was a small, oilcloth-wrapped box, rusted at the edges but surprisingly heavy. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were documents stamped in bold red ink, classified property of U.S. Treasury. Before David could process the implications, Ranger barked twice, the sharp, rhythmic signal he used during deployment to mark discovery, not danger. He trotted to the back of the barn and nosed insistently at a raised section of dirt. David dug deeper and uncovered a cold metal ring embedded in the earth. With a grunt, he hooked his fingers under it and pulled. The ground groaned open, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Heart pounding, David grabbed his flashlight and stepped onto the first stair, Ranger glued to his side, muscles tense but steady. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of damp concrete, old oil, and something untouched for decades. The walls transitioned from raw earth to smooth, riveted steel panels bolted together with military-grade precision. At the bottom, a narrow corridor stretched ahead, lit by faint emergency bulbs powered by a generator that somehow still hummed softly after who knew how many years. At the far end stood a massive steel door, stenciled in faded black paint. Authorized personnel only, Federal Reserve storage. David's breath caught in his throat. He'd heard whispers in the Marines about Cold War contingency vaults, hidden caches built to preserve national assets in case of nuclear attack or economic collapse. No one ever confirmed they existed. But here it was. The lock mechanism was a coded turn-wheel system, the kind used only in high-security federal installations. Muscle memory surged back. Left 3 clicks, pause, right 2, hold, then twist. A sharp click echoed through the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling as the door groaned open, splitting down the center. Inside, rows of metal shelves gleamed under the beam of his light, gold bars stamped with federal serial numbers, sealed crates labeled Treasury Bonds, 1953, and document cases preserved in airtight plastic. On a dusty desk, near the entrance, sat a leather-bound ledger. David flipped it open with trembling hands. Handwritten entries detailed inventory logs, security protocols, and a final tally. Total valuation, $110 million. Hidden beneath, a farm everyone called worthless, forgotten by time, buried under judgment and neglect. David stood frozen in the doorway, the beam of his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. Ranger pressed against his leg, not whining, not barking, just present, as if anchoring him to reality. The sheer scale of what lay before them defied belief. This wasn't a stash. This was a full Cold War-era Federal Reserve vault, meticulously engineered, climate-controlled, and completely abandoned. He ran a hand along a shelf of gold bars, each one cold and heavy with history. In another crate, rare silver certificates from the 1930s. In sealed tubes, microfilm containing encrypted financial records. Everything was organized, labeled, preserved, as if someone expected to return any day. But no one had. For nearly 70 years, this chamber had slept beneath rotting wood and overgrown weeds, waiting. And it took a dog, a rescue dog, a war dog, a healer, to wake it up. David thought of all the times he'd doubted himself, all the nights he'd stared at the ceiling wondering if he'd ever feel useful again. Now, standing in a vault worth more than most people see in 10 lifetimes, he realized the real miracle wasn't the gold. It was that Ranger never stopped believing in him, even when he'd stopped believing in himself. Within hours, black SUVs rolled down the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. Federal agents in crisp suits surveyed the vault, while county officials stared in stunned silence, mouths agape. Reporters gathered beyond the fence, shouting questions, calling David the $1 millionaire and the luckiest veteran alive. Lawyers confirmed the unbelievable, because he legally owned the land, the vault, and everything inside it belonged to him. Offers poured in, buyouts from private collectors, interviews with major networks, even a book deal. But David barely heard them. He sat on the porch steps that evening, Ranger's head resting heavily on his knee, replaying the last few days in his mind. Just weeks ago, he'd slept in his truck outside a VA clinic, wondering if he had the strength to keep going. The world had written him off, just like they'd written off this land. Yet here he was, not because of luck, but because of loyalty. Because a dog who'd seen war, who'd saved lives and carried trauma of his own, hadn't given up on him. Ranger had sensed something beneath the rot and ruin when no human could. He'd led David not just to treasure, but to redemption. Locals who once pitted him now stood at a distance, eyes wide with awe. Their whispers had changed. He didn't just save that dog, someone murmured to a friend. That dog saved him. David didn't sell the vault. Instead, he worked with federal historians to preserve it as a Cold War memorial. He used a portion of the funds to restore the farm, not into a mansion, but into a sanctuary, part home, part rehabilitation center for veterans and their service dogs. The barn was rebuilt, stronger than before, and the fields now bloom with wildflowers and vegetable gardens tended by those healing from invisible wounds. Every morning, David walks the perimeter with Ranger, who still pauses sometimes near the old hatch site, ears perked, as if remembering the day he changed everything. Visitors come from across the country, not for the gold, but for the story, for proof that broken things can be remade, that loyalty outlasts loss, that sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't measured in dollars, but in second chances. Sometimes the things the world calls worthless hold the greatest value. Ranger didn't just dig up gold. He dug up hope. In a quiet corner of a forgotten farm, a Marine and his K-9 proved that second chances aren't found in grand gestures, but in the silent trust between two souls who refuse to quit on each other. That bond, forged in fire, tested by loss, and renewed in dirt and dust, is worth more than any vault. And maybe, just maybe, the real treasure wasn't the gold or the bonds, but the moment David realized he still mattered. That he hadn't been left behind. That even on a $1 farm, with nothing but a loyal dog and a heartbeat full of scars, he could still find a future worth fighting for. If this story moved you, please hit like, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Rescue Tales for more true stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. And I'd love to hear from you. What's something you believed was worthless until you looked closer? Drop your answer in the comments below. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss a story. Because sometimes miracles don't come in flashes of lightning. They come on 4 paws, digging in the dirt, reminding us that even the broken places can hold something beautiful.